But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Please be seated. In August of 1619, a ship appeared on the horizon near Point Comfort, a coastal port in the English colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to the colonists. No aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. It is with these words that Nicole Hannah-Jones started the 1619 Project, which was a sweeping initiative that she began in conjunction with the New York Times that sought a more truthful telling of how the institution of slavery has inexorably shaped American life. The essays, podcasts, photo collections that make up the project tell a challenging history. It's not the fairy tale version of US history that I was taught in school. There were these straightforward stories of good guys and bad guys. They created this American pantheon of heroes to be venerated. The 1619 Project does not present a gilded account of America that assumes that we've always been on the right side of history. It was willing to be iconoclastic, taking on historical figures and concepts, asking deeper questions about who has been left out of the American dream and the extent to which that exclusion has seeped in and shaped the DNA of our country. And that project focuses on one central paradox. How could a nation built on the ideal that all men are created equal have for nearly 3 centuries denied equal protection and respect to the people on whose backs it was built? The project traces the experience of Black people on these shores, from the arrival of those first enslaved Africans, through the stories of the free and enslaved people who fought in the American Revolution, and on up through the present day. The project centers on the experiences of Black Americans who, though they've been left out of that founding vision for so long, have fought, resisted, and died for those very same ideals. Through the project, what emerges is a picture of our nation, a nation that is still informed, that is still striving to live up to those hopes that it had for itself at its outset, that's still struggling to be that land of opportunity that it has long considered itself to be. If you haven't looked into the project, and I realize it's been sort of politicized in the years since it's been released, but I encourage you to read the essays, to look at the photos, to listen to the pieces that have come out of it. It's challenging, but it's also, I think, really important for us to confront. Central to the project is the act of remembering. And that act of remembering, of telling history faithfully and honestly, resonates with the reading that we heard from the book of Joshua today. In that reading, we encounter Joshua and the leaders of Israel gathered in the city of Shechem at the edge of the land of Canaan that they are about to enter. We see them before they enter that land and before they confront the inhabitants of that land. Joshua, their leader, knows that the way ahead will be difficult, that they will face the temptation either to turn back or to give in to the cultural pressures that they face in the new land. And so he presents them with a choice. Choose which gods you will follow, and 3 options. On the one hand, they can turn back to the gods who they worship, that their ancestors worshiped back in the land of Egypt before they were set free. They can turn back to those gods of their past and seek refuge in what was known and familiar. Or on the other hand, they can follow the gods of the land, the people of the land that they are about to enter. They can take on those new gods, and life will be easier. That is the path to assimilation, to becoming a part of the people who they encounter in their day-to-day lives, rather than seeing themselves as separate. That path would certainly avoid any conflict and perhaps give them the peace that they had so long sought after. And then there's the third option, to follow Yahweh, the Lord, to continue on the path that Yahweh has set for them, to enter into the promised land, and to continue to obey the God who had brought them thus far. In so many ways, this choice of which gods they will follow is a choice of how they'll remember the past. To turn back to the gods of their ancestors would be to give in to nostalgia, to pretend like the past was something other than what it was. The desire to return to Egypt, to that time in their life together, would mean trading the promise of something new that had been their hope wandering in the wilderness for all those years, for what was certain and known, that there's something concrete and grounding about the past. It's easy to seek comfort in it. In Egypt, they had enough food. And sure, slavery under Pharaoh wasn't great, but they knew they'd at least be provided for. They knew what to expect. And from the perspective of their present struggle, the past they left behind looked simpler, more bearable. But the choice to follow those old gods was the choice to chase after a past that never actually was. And then on the other hand, this choice to follow the new gods is a choice to forget the past completely, to pretend like it has no bearing on the present moment. And for the Israelites to give up on their God who led them to this point would mean losing their identity, to forsake who they are, to just move on, to assimilate, to become one of the people of the land. But doing so would be to deny their place as God's chosen people, to forget what God had done for them up to this point. In so many ways, the third choice, the choice to follow the Lord, was the hardest one. To choose to follow Yahweh meant an honest remembering of the past, remembering that it was Yahweh who led them through the Red Sea, Yahweh who led them out of Egypt, Yahweh who led them out of the hands of Pharaoh. It was Yahweh who fed them manna in the wilderness, the Lord who led them to the threshold of the promised land. But it was also the Lord who gave them the law, who expected obedience and punished them when they turned away. To follow Yahweh meant remembering both the struggle as well as the deliverance. It also meant an uncertain future. Yes, the hope for prosperity, but also the need for obedience. To follow God meant a commitment of their whole selves and remembering the past as it truly was. They couldn't leave what they had experienced behind or just act as if to turn back the clock. All of us face choices about how we relate to the past. That's one of the things the 1619 Project raises up. We can try to turn away and look back to the old gods, those gilded stories of a country that got it right time and again. We can pretend that the past was something other than what it was. Or we can act like the past isn't there at all. We can put the blinders on and just look forward, pretending like racial disparities and oppression are a thing that belong to those past eras, that we were and are not a part of. We can claim we don't see color, and that the same laws and opportunities are there for all. Or we can choose the more difficult path, an honest reckoning with our past. We can strive for a more honest telling of history in order to see our present day with greater clarity, to see the needs for justice that continue on to this very moment. To see our past as for what it is isn't unpatriotic. It's one of the most patriotic things we can do. To see that past, to see our history with all of both the darkness and the light, helps us shape a path forward. In her essay introducing the project, Nicole Hannah-Jones holds those two aspects of history, the darkness and the light, together in tension. She both sees the oppression of her people in the past, but also sees their service, their willingness to die for the ideals of this country, their belief in the good that this country can represent. And in that service, In that commitment to those ideals, she finds hope for the future. The most memorable line of our reading today comes at the end of Joshua's speech. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Joshua makes his choice. He makes the choice to remain faithful to God, faithful to the truth. He makes the choice to remember honestly what his people had gone through and to trust that God would lead them through again, would lead them into that promised land. And the leaders of Israel echo his words. They will serve the Lord. In that moment, they renew their commitment to God. They choose to remember their past and to let it shape their path forward. What does it mean to be a household in service of the Lord? The elders of Israel helped answer that question. To serve the Lord means to remember the past but not get stuck in it. To serve the Lord means having faith for the future, believing through the living God that all things are possible, that what is to come doesn't need to just repeat what has been, but to build on that past, to perfect it. We worship a God who is drawing all things into God's self, remaking them in love. Our faith is in the God who redeems all things. Part of that redemption is the transformation of the past. God is leading us towards wholeness, into a promised land to which the sins of that past are redeemed. That is the heart of the Christian story, that all things are being made new in God through Christ. All past injustices, the sins of individuals and of nations, God is making all things new. And what our reading from Joshua shows is that remaking requires remembering. It requires confronting the past as it was, repenting when it's necessary, and recognizing the ways that God has been leading us all along. A life of faith requires remembering where we have been so that we can open our eyes to where God is leading us forward. On this day, I pray that we may all share in the faith of Joshua. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Amen.